Hi, I'm M.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome. Hey, M.
Hi, Bea. How's it going? I'm excited to talk about the kind of odd thing that we're talking about today.
What are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about a somewhat amorphous concept. It's all over Tumblr, at least within the fanfiction circles on Tumblr, but I don't find it anywhere else, really, unless you're really into TV tropes, which is where I found some information about this. You've seen the title. It's red-blue ships. They're weird.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not just because, well, you're probably thinking at this point, if you don't know what it is, they paint everybody blue and red? That's not it. Although sometimes they do get a little bit heavy-handed with the color work, as some of our examples will show.
It's such a trope to have two characters butt heads with each other and that their clothing or maybe hair, if it's an anime maybe, or something about their actual visual representation of the character is red and blue. Like that's a thing. But we're also talking about the personalities of the characters themselves in the ship. It's definitely a thing to be able to pick out pretty easily, I'd say, if you're into fic, whether a character is blue or a character is red within a ship. And that's where it kind of gets fun.
Although, as you're probably going to come to see, it does sort of smack you in the face when it is that way. There's a lot of gray zones. It's sort of like, and I hate to bring this up because it's a whole can of worms, but it's kind of like a Mary Sue. You know it when you see it, but if you're not sure, everybody will argue about it.
Oh boy. I can't wait to do an episode of Mary Sue. It's going to be fun, but it's a can of worms. So, if you do know about tropes, you might have thought, oh, is this like red oni, blue oni? It's not necessarily, but I think it's a good way to start the conversation about red-blue ships. So, red oni, blue oni is a trope where you have two individuals in a story that are linked together somehow, but they have really different personalities, so much so that you'll truly be able to see whether one is red and whether one is blue. And the colors themselves represent really different personality traits. So the red oni is associated with passion, wildness, and defiance. They're usually like stronger, like physically, and very extroverted or determined. They're more like fiery.
They're often confident too.
Yeah, true. Much more confident or kind of bullheaded. Like they just charge. They charge into a situation. But the blue oni is they're more cerebral. They like to control the situation and they're intellectual and they're usually respected by others, but others don't necessarily understand them because of their cerebrality. If that's a word.
They tend to be less emotional. They either don't express them as obviously or they just tend to be calmer. So
yeah, they're cooler. They're definitely not as hot-tempered as the red oni.
I think of Amy from Sailor Moon. She's smart and she's relatively calm most of the time, or at least not as extroverted as, say, Usagi. And she's definitely not as hot-headed as Rei. So,
but yeah, that is definitely a trope that people use to describe certain relationships between characters. It's definitely not always romantic. It's kind of rarely romantic, or at least it's what it was described on the tvtropes.org website where I found this trope. But there are some other tropes that I think we should talk about a little bit. There's the energetic and soft-spoken duo. So let me read this quote that I found from tvtropes.org. A character's speech patterns, especially how much and how loud they speak, are often the most apparent indicator of their personality. This trope is by pairing two ends of this spectrum into a duo. Like in Red Oni, Blue Oni, the energetic partner is often the character who gives the impetus to act and the energy to move forward, while the soft-spoken partner is usually more introspective and savvy and acts as the energetic partner's level-headed counterweight. So the characters themselves, it's how they speak in this duo and in this trope that describes whether they're blue or red. It's almost always that the energetic character is the red character and the soft-spoken character is the blue character. I just thought that was interesting interesting because that's a lot of cases with red-blue ships too.
A great example of that particular soft-spoken versus loud dynamic would be Hardison and Elliot from Leverage. Hardison talks all the time very loudly. He expresses himself verbally quite a bit, whereas Elliot tends to be fairly quiet, but he is very competent at the way he does it and uses more actions to sort of express himself. So you've got Hardison being the red Oni and Elliot being the blue Oni.
And there's just another one, the fire-water juxtaposition trope. When a writer wants to form an immediately obvious contrast between two characters, places, or events, though it can be particularly visually stimulating to associate one with fire and one with water, perhaps drawing a contrast between creation and destruction, tranquility and belligerence, or nurturing and consuming. This is not necessarily romantic, I would say, but it is a way also to describe the contrast between these two characters, and in my humble opinion, can turn romantic real quick.
Which I had a thought about that particular duality, which is it too on the nose? Shark Boy and Lava Girl?
Yes. I knew where you were going with that. What's interesting is that it's not necessarily fire, it is lava. So it's like liquid fire. But Shark Boy and Lava Girl for life. But that movie is known for being on the nose in everything it does. So why not do automatic fire-water juxtaposition trope in that film as well? So we kind of talked about red-blue at the beginning, but red-blue ships aren't just red Oni, blue Oni, or energetic and soft-spoken duo, or fire-water juxtaposition. It really has to do with their personalities within the romantic sphere of shipping characters. And when you read a lot of fic, and when you're in the fandom, and you read a lot of different ships, you can start to really feel out, wow, this is such a red-blue ship. You know, like I would say that red-blue ships, you know it when you read it. And as an example, Kirk Spock from Star Trek. It's kind of the OG like ship, if you listen to our last episode, at least within the modern sphere of fanfiction. But to us, let's just say it's the OG ship. And it works so well because one is so cool-headed and tranquil all the time, and one is not. Kirk is not, and Spock is tranquil and logical. And it just makes for really good romance because they're both so dissimilar, and yet their intrinsic parts of themselves, the important value systems of themselves, complement each other. That to me makes a really good red-blue ship. And they both don't have like red-blue coloring. I mean, Spock wears blue, but Kirk doesn't. He wears yellow in the show.
We're ignoring the movies where they change the costumes. We don't talk about that.
No, we don't. But yeah, they really work. I mean, it's been like close to 60 years? And people still ship them and still write fan fiction about them. So something's working. And I would say that it partly has to do with their red-blueness. They're kind of foils for each other. But yeah, do you want to talk about Clance?
Speaking of on the nose, the ship Clance is Keith Lance from Voltron the Legendary Defender, specifically Legendary Defender, not necessarily the older shows. And Keith is the Red Paladin, and Lance is the Blue Paladin. Although in later seasons that changes slightly, but they still wear red and blue. That never really changes. And they too are a red-blue ship, although whether or not the colors they actually wear necessarily go with which red or blue they are, debatable. You have Lance, who is very charismatic and extroverted, and mouth runs a mile a minute, and he tries to charm his way out of situations, and is a decent pilot and fighter, but that's not his forte in the team. And you've got Keith, who doesn't say much. He's sort of grumpy and stoic, but he's an excellent fighter and pilot. That's his real strength. So when you have the romance between them, you've got these two complementary people, again, sort of in orbit, where they have these connections, where they're both on the same team, they're fighting for the same side, but they're different enough, not just necessarily in their skills and personalities, but in how they deal with the situations they're in. It's a lot like Kirk Spock, in that they do play off of one another. They provide a foil for one another.
I will say, though, about Clance, a good example for this is Keith, is it called a Bayard?
Yes.
The thing that they have? Yeah, a Bayard. His turns into a sword, and Lance's Bayard turns into a gun, a sharpshooter, laser gun.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to describe visually the two characters and how they interact with each other. Because another way is kind of, we will talk about Stucky, but like Steve has a shield and Bucky is a sharpshooter sniper person in the war.
But
They're different but complementary, and they work together and they tag team.
And it's important to note that even though they have different weapons, they're both still weapons. So they have opposite ways of going about doing the same sorts of things, but they're still doing those things.
Yes. And together, most importantly. But yeah, they're very different from each other, but they're not different from each other where it counts. And that's the red-blue ship in general.
So we should probably go back and explain foils, because for those of you who may not be an English major, that's probably something that you haven't had to think about in a while, at the very least. So, an excellent quote that explains sort of the thought behind what a foil is jewelers often put shiny metal foil underneath a gem to make the stone shine brighter, or display them on dark velvet to bring attention to their brightness. A literary foil serves a similar purpose. The character appears in close proximity to another to highlight their character traits, usually by contrast. In the classic story of good versus evil, the hero and villain play the other's foil, and that each acts to show how the other behaves in certain situations. But virtually any story with multiple characters can use contrast to show greater depth to them. Two persons do not have to be on opposite ends of the moral spectrum to be foils. Foils need to be seen together. The interaction between the contrasting characters is what makes this trope work. A pair of foils may be strangers when the story begins, but they need to come together at some point in the story and let their opposed personalities shine through. Otherwise, we just have a pair of characters with different personalities. Which, I'm trying to think of good examples of not foil characters.
Maybe like Steve and Director Fury from the MCU. They're both similar enough that they wouldn't be foils. They're not directly contrasting each other in order for the audience to see the respective characters more aptly or more clearly.
Which, there is a long literary discussion to be had within that particular vein of thought in and of itself, but suffice to say,
true.
Red-Blue thrives on relationships being foils to one another in a major way. There are ways to be foils just sometimes.
Yeah, I would also say that there's a reason why a lot of people love to ship hero and villains, like hero villains together, because hero/villain ships are always foils. If it's a good hero-villain duo, then it has to be a foil. Like, it's boring if they're not. Like Lex Luthor and Superman.
Well,
one has superpowers and decides to use it for good, but is like monetarily poor and socially pretty, like, doesn't have much power. The other one has a lot of power and is very rich, but uses that for evil. That's a true definition of a hero villain foil. But lots of people ship them. I think that's just a tendency for people to ship people who are foils, but that's not necessarily specifically red-blue shipping. So another example of good example ships for red-blue would be Ineffable Husbands, in my opinion, or Crowley and Aziraphale from Good Omens. Crowley is very red and Aziraphale is very blue, but what makes it fun in the show is when they exhibit personality traits that are on the opposite sides. One is a demon and one is an angel, so like it's fun when the angel does something that is a little bit not good. I'm not saying evil, but not good. And then it's fun when the demon does something that's a little bit not evil. Not necessarily good, but not evil. That's what makes it really fun to watch, because they're not stereotypes. They're more human than they are angel and demon.
And I think that's maybe part of the fun of red-blue, is the idea that you have a formula here. Here's what a red is, here's what a blue is, but then when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of the ship, they tend to sort of swap traits sometimes and swap roles situationally, and that's part of what makes it fun, is you know in your brain, this is the formula, these are the characters they are, and how their relationship works, except for sometimes, and you're just sort of waiting for those, except for this point, where your red character is suddenly very cool and collected, and you're like, ooh, this is exciting.
Yeah, so like it's also really fun when a cool, calm, and collected character or a blue character just goes off the rocker and just explodes at somebody because that's the right time to do it. And it's really fun when the red character has to be a spy. Like, just as examples. It's cool to see them have to be uncomfortable with the situation, but because they're in love or have a relationship with the other character, they know how to act. I love that idea in a fic. It's so fun. Another example would be Sokka Zuko or Katara Zuko from The Last Airbender, or Avatar: The Last Airbender. I know that one is from the Water Tribe and one is from the Fire Nation. Like, I'm aware it's very red blue, like just visually, but it's also their personalities. Sokka Zuko is kind of a funny mix because Sokka is the jokester, which is very red. But when he is truly himself, he's very calm, cool, collected, intellectual, makes good plans, and then is able to like get them done. He's the kind of the intellectual of the group. I love that. I love Sokka. And then Zuko loves to show to other people that he is like cool and doesn't care about anything. But he actually has such fiery passion. He is a firebender, but alas. So maybe they're kind of an inverted red blue ship where what they really want to show to other people, they put kind of like a mask on themselves, but on the inside they're actually red blue, you know?
Again, it's playing with the trope where you know there's a red and a blue here, but you're not 100% sure every time which one is which.
Yes, and that's what makes it really fun. I love red blue ships. I love it when a trope gives you parameters and then fic writers are able to be creative within a box. I think it's more fun to be creative within a box as opposed to outside the box because anything is possible outside of the box. But when you're in parameters, you almost have to be more creative. So we found some ships that are kind of in between. They're not necessarily not red blue, but they aren't necessarily red blue either. Would you like to talk about Stucky B?
So we talked a lot about Stucky because our knee-jerk reaction was to say it was red-blue. But after kind of thinking it through, we were a little bit more undecided about it because you've got Steve, who is Captain America and is a soldier, and you've got Bucky, who's the Winter Soldier. And on the surface, you can sort of say, okay, Captain America's probably a blue. He's tactical minded. He's a soldier. He's good at his job. He's a commander. You know, cool, calm, collected, intellectual. And you've got the Winter Soldier, who is just extremely violent and doesn't care about losses and just sort of goes off. But the Winter Soldier is also very calm because he's been brainwashed to basically have no emotions. And you've got Steve Rogers, who's known for being extremely passionate about what he does. You've got Steve Rogers, who, at least in the MCU, kind of flipped off 117 countries, and Bucky Barnes, who is willing to follow the letter of the law and turn himself in. And it gets fuzzy as you start trying to parse out which parts of them are red and which are blue, and it gets further complicated by the fact that if you're looking at them in the 40s, you've got Steve Rogers, who picks fight in every alley in Brooklyn, and Bucky Barnes, who's an upstanding officer of the army and stops him from getting in fights. So there is an argument to be made for it being a red-blue ship, but actually trying to figure out where the red-blue divide is pretty dang hard. Because they're just a little bit too muddled.
I would say that the ships we're talking about right now are very purple. They both have equal personality traits of a regular red-blue person, like in them. Mm-hmm. Their souls are like purple as characters. Because there's no divide. In my opinion, you can't really pick one as red and one as blue because you keep saying, no, this is actually part of their personality and this is actually part of their other personality, and it's just kind of hard. With other characters that are actually red-blue ships, you can make that distinct line and then see how they have to navigate the world in a situation in which they aren't automatically like allowed to use their real personality in that situation. The authors are creating situations in which they would have to navigate the world in a different way than they're used to, as opposed to Stucky, where both are able to navigate in ways that they need to in any way because they're purple. They're not red blue. I don't really know how to describe it better than that, but
they're very much foils to each other, which is an element of the trope, but it doesn't feel like their distinct personality traits fit the trope quite right.
Exactly. Like B said, there's an argument to be had, but we can't necessarily say who's red and who's blue. Anyway, I would also say Din Luke is kind of an in-between ship. They are foils for each other. They're kind of inverted characters, but I really couldn't tell you who's red and who's blue.
Merthyr is also is not really quite red-blue. They're definitely foils. They're definitely got a lot of very blatant opposite qualities in the show, but unlike Steve Bucky, who are a little bit too much of both sides of the trope, Arthur and Merlin are a little bit too similar. With the exception of their specific skill sets, in terms of personality, they share most personality traits, with a couple of distinct outliers like relative degree of arrogance and social standing. But they're both extremely powerful. They are both extremely competent at what they do. They both have a massive hero complex and wield hold enormous power in their own spheres. In terms of personality, they want to be good people making the correct choices and make mistakes along the way.
They're purple. Anyway, we have a couple of examples that I would say are definitely not red-blue. So I have read some Ready Fix, which is Richie and Eddie from the It fandom. So it's such a wonderful little ship, but I would definitely say they're not red-blue because they're very similar. They grew up together, kind of like Stucky, but they're like a green ship. Both of them are not fiery or cool. The soul of the characters they don't work within those parameters.
A great example of a not red-blue ship would be Beatrice Benedict, because they are just the same person split into two genders. They are not different enough at all. They are two personalities that are actually the same personality, and they found each other again and lived happily ever after.
Yeah, it's like that myth that humans originally used to be like connected to, like soulmates used to be connected, and Zeus was like, nuh-uh, and then like threw a bolt of lightning down and cut everybody in half, and it's the human's job to find their other half, and Beatrice and Benedict are those other halves. They're so similar to each other.
So there's nothing particularly foily to play off of. They're too similar to really play off of each other. And I say that with full understanding that basically all of their dialogue is banter. That's just their personalities interacting.
So yeah, those ships are pretty bad examples of red-blue. They're great ships. I recommend Reddy and Beatrice Benedict. They're great ships, but they're not necessarily red-blue. They're just too similar, in our opinion. Okay, so that's it. Now it's time for Rec Corner! So my rec is definitely of the kind of purple-y variety when talking about red blue ships. So it is Garden or Graveyard by ShanaStoryteller. This is the small summary. Merlin has a secret. Arthur, it turns out, also has a secret. It's the same secret. So it's really cute. It has some great Hurt Comfort, and as I've said, I'm a whore for Hurt Comfort. At the very beginning, no less, it has Hurt Comfort. It's about Merlin kind of coming out as a magical person to Arthur, and Arthur in turn coming out as a magical person to him. And it's great because the one thing Merlin can't do is heal, and the one thing Arthur can only do is heal. And they're very complimentary in the fic. It's very sweet. High recommend. It's only 11K. I want to reread it right now. It makes me so joyful, and B actually recommended it to me, so it's also kind of a B rec, but it's really good.
So my rec this week is Bluebird by Waldorph. It is a Star Trek The Original Series Kirk Spock fic. It is actually alternate original series, not the original series. So it's based in the 2009 movies world, and it's set after the third movie where they are back at a spaceport and they're rebuilding the Enterprise to go out and finish their 5-year mission. And it's this interlude where the Enterprise is being built and relationships are being redefined. And at the heart of it, it is a Kirk-Spock romance, but it's also at least a little bit about Kirk falling in love with his ship and reigniting the spark that made him want to travel the stars and be a starship captain. It's a really, really lovely fic. It's kind of a comfort fic for me, so it's also not very long. It has a wonderful podcast as well, which I would 100% recommend you listen to. And I guess if any of you have any thoughts on more red-blue ships or want to argue with us about the ships that we've talked about,
yes,
please contact us at mandbeapresents@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
It'll be in the show notes, as of course our recs that we just wrecked. All right, I think we're done.
I guess we'll see y'all next week
on Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!